What's up, y'all? TCG here, back with another video. And today I got for you my top 5 decks to take into OP12 post-ban. I'm just going to give you guys a list of decks and some reasons as to why I think these decks should be strong after some of the restrictions and the unrestrictions that we got in the meta. For those who don't know, the blue-purple Luffy leader has received the first set of paired bans in the One Piece card game. Previously, Bandai has implemented the paired ban system in the Digimon card game, but they decided to bring that over here to One Piece, and the paired bans themselves are 9-cost Lin, as well as the 8-cost Katakuri blocker. Those two cards in the blue-purple Luffy strategy just allowed the deck to continuously heal and prolong the game past what the deck should be able to do, in combination with a bunch of counter events. Functionally, the deck would just get to the late game by ramping, and then establish multiple big bodies with the addition of 9-cost Sanji, and just outvalue the opponent throughout the course of the game. So Bandai decided to address the leader by making sure that you were not able to run the 9-cost Lin as well as the 8-cost Katakuri blocker along with this leader, which I think was a very smart and elegant solution into dealing with this deck. Now, before I get into the top 5 decks that I'm expecting to make a rise and to potentially control the meta, I wanted to talk about some honorable mentions. I think all of the purple Luffy leaders, minus red purple Luffy to some extent, are still pretty viable. However, I don't consider them in the top 5. We have green purple Luffy. You know, it's still just one of the strongest 2 bodies a turn deck, being able to cheat a bunch of Dawn with Sanji Pudding, and then its insane consistency in the 4-cost Zoro Searcher. You know, I don't think this deck is to be underestimated coming up in the current format. However, I just don't think it's top 5 because of some of the newer additions to the top 5 that you'll see later on in the list. I still think if you're good with this deck, you can still pilot it and see some moderate success in the format, even to like top to a win. I wouldn't be surprised if this leader was still topping. You know, I would be glad to be proven wrong. The next leader that I want to talk about in the honorable mentions is the black-purple Luffy leader. They gained new support in the OP12 Robin card, which is a 6/7 blocker that can also increase its cost. I think it becomes an 8-costed unit, as well as it has the effect to have your opponent discard 2 cards from their hand, being able to play that on 6 or even earlier because this leader also ramps. So being able to play that on turn 3, I think can feel really strong. You know, milling some cards out your opponent's hand control is also strong. I think this leader, giving its characters cost as well, can help it perform against some of the removal decks that should be coming out, that I'm predicting to come out in this meta. So the black purple Luffy deck, I think, is a deck to watch out for. It still has some of the previous upgrades, and I think it's going to be strong moving forward. Blue purple Luffy, I think people are going to cook on this leader. The leader ability still is really strong, being able to draw 2 cards a turn functionally. You just won't have that inevitability as to like, I'm just going to win late game as you did before with like the healing and the huge blocker. I've seen people talk about other cards in the deck, you know, the 8-cost Aramaki blocker, which is like another 8/8 blocker that the deck can play and cheat out of Sanji. You know, people are thinking about more of the Rush Luffy, the 8-drop Rush Luffy, to help deal with like the smaller bodies. People are also thinking about 9-drop Mihawk as, you know, more removal. I don't know which direction this deck is going to go in, but people are still excited to test with it, and people haven't given up hope on this leader. I just hope it still isn't format warping. It would be kind of embarrassing if Bandai had to, you know, hit this leader again. But I don't think that's going to be the case. And the last of the purple Luffy leaders that I want to talk about is Pluffy, the OG mono purple Luffy. I think he's one of like the bigger winners of the bans out of the purple Luffy leader. Like, I think he's the best purple Luffy leader to play, just because his strategy hasn't changed. Recently, people have been employing more of a, I'm just going to ramp about 3 times and get to 8 Dawn on turn 3, so that I can play my 8-cost Katakuri and then into 9 Mom. So this leader can still play the Big Mom Pirates package, and it's really good at it. You know, being able to have its own ramp so it doesn't need to draw into ramp is really has always been the strongest thing about mono purple Luffy, about Pluffy. And then still being able to have that package and then employing newer ramp cards to do so would feel really strong as well. So I think this leader just might sneak up on you and top more. I'm curious to test with this leader. I don't feel as if he'll do super good into removal, but you know, there is no Ice Age, so the opponents may not be able to remove his larger bodies on curve. And then also this leader can't, like, you know, Sanji into Linlin or Sanji into Katakuri, 9-cost Sanji into those bodies. So he may be a little bit slower with how he swarms, but still being able to play an 8-drop on turn 3 is kind of insane. Next honorable mention, Bonnie. I think Bonnie's a really strong leader. UP was like her worst matchup, and if that leader isn't super represented, slash if his package isn't the same and he doesn't have that inevitability, she might just be able to outgrind and win in a lot of situations. Her being a control deck, being able to stabilize against like the mid-range and the aggro and rein those decks in is going to be her key strength in the format. However, with the abundance of removal that we're going to expect, I don't think she can take the top 5 spots. She's really close though. I think she'll be like her and Pluffy in my mind. Her, Pluffy, and GP are all fighting for like the 6/7th deck out of the top 5. You know, you can sort of put them adjacent to those decks. Next is Green Purple Lim. I think she's just a very competent mid-range slash aggro deck. She's not like as much of a 2-body per turn deck as Green Purple Luffy, but you know, being able to play 5 drops on turn 2 is really strong, and then like 2 5-drops on turn 3 can be strong as well. And then ramping into other strong cards like Mihawk, I think that's insane. Being able to play that 8/8, even though it'll be rested, being able to play that 8/8, untapping 4 Dawn, and then playing another 5-drop seems pretty strong to me. So I don't think we should discount Lim. I might test her a little bit as well. She seems really cool to play with and test with, especially with like some of the newer OP12 cards. So if she tops, I wouldn't be too surprised as well. Lastly, for the honorable mentions, I know this section took a little bit longer, but we have Mono Blue Buggy. If removal decks are going to be king, I think Buggy is going to be right there to keep them down, because Crocodile Mihawk is an insane floodgate. Being able to discard, having to force these decks to try and double pop, you know, to try and eat all of the cards out of your hand would waste a bunch of their resources, while meanwhile only taking 2 cards out of yours. And even then a double pop doesn't work because Crocodile is not once per turn. So the opponent can try and funnel all of their resources to try and remove your board, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. So I think this can be a good answer to the upcoming meta, at least like week 1, week 2, before it really gets solidified while everyone's trying out the new toys. Now we're going to get into the top 5 decks of the upcoming format, OP12 post-ban. At number 5, I have with him Mr. Red-Haired Shanks. I think him losing his worst matchup in Blue Purple Luffy, or supposedly losing his worst matchup in Blue Purple Luffy, definitely increases the strength of this leader. Shanks has always had a pretty insane generic leader ability. The only problem in his deck was consistency, and then making it to that end game. He also struggles a little bit with aggro, but there aren't too many premier aggro decks that I don't think he'll be able to deal with as the control Shanks deck. Being able to remove a bunch of these cost-based, floodgatey units that are in like the purple Luffy decks doesn't matter to Shanks because he has red removal. I think power-based removal is the strongest based removal in the game. That's why it's not too heavily leaned into it. Shanks and Marco and Ace, even Mono Red Ace, are kind of our first red control leaders that didn't really take off, but Shanks did. That's just because he's a 5-life leader. He's able to make it to that late game, and he has powerful red units such as 10-drop Shanks to help close out games and stifle aggro once he stabilizes. So I think Shanks is definitely back on the rise. He's something to look out for, and you know, we should definitely be watching him. I wouldn't be surprised if this leader takes up some tops in the upcoming format. Next is Red Rayleigh. People are thinking because of the other 2 decks, or because of the newly unbanned Sakazuki leader, that Rayleigh is just dead because the sword events, being able to bottom a 2 and a 1 functionally hits everything in Rayleigh's deck, since Rayleigh can't play any 5-cost or greater units. However, people forget that Sakazuki is a 4-life leader, and you know, Mono Red Zoro had a decent matchup and Red Purple Law had a decent matchup into Sakazuki back in his prime because they can just kill him before he's able to stabilize. Red has access to rush units, and then being able to attack your opponent with those rush units and get all of that value really pays dividends into that 4-life leader. So I think the matchup is pretty close. It isn't like 60-40 or 70-30 in favor of Sokka, as most people would have you think at a first glance. So I think Rayleigh is like the aggro deck of the format. His leader ability is insane. His package is consistent, and we should not underestimate this leader. I'm sorry. Moving in at number 3 is going to be Mono Black Rob Lucci. This leader, once again, with almost everyone on this list, lost Blue Purple Luffy as like the premier deck. And Rob Lucci is famous for gatekeeping a whole bunch of other colors, and he can keep the aggro decks down. With the Moria and the Ice Age band, his deck low-key got, I wouldn't say stronger, but I think his deck just became a little bit more insane as to like you having to focus on the bodies that it produces, and you can't really afford to rush down the leader, with just how consistent he is at filling up the trash to be able to find his pieces and being able to play those pieces. He can comfortably play and extend the game and taking time to play units like Mansherry and Casey Mills or counters with his Rebecca, whereas I don't think other black decks can. Lucci can really function with his trash as a second hand in a way that no other deck can. So just those resources, him being 5 life, him having such a good leader ability, and him being able to adjust his deck to, you know, go towards the direction of the meta, I think is really strong. And I think maybe the only reason we won't see Lucci topping is because all of the Lucci players just switched over to Sokka anyway. But if there are people who think that Lucci is better than Sokka, still play him, I think they'll be rewarded for it moving into this format. Next, at number 2, old man himself. He's back, everyone. Tupac's back. Sakazuki. He came off the ban list. He will be legal for these OP12 tournaments moving forward. And this leader is just insane in his prime. I think he took 3 out of the 4 top spots in Worlds, or like 4 out of 4 in the first One Piece World Championships when he was like first released. This leader is insane. Blue-black, having access to both bottom decking as well as regular KO is super important. Him having that -1 on attacking, similar to Lucci. So he's able to just get a free -1 on his leader. Being able to cycle a card every turn and essentially see 6 cards every turn is another mainstay into what made Sakazuki so strong. Rebecca Hina Lucci, you know, existed before the Rob Lucci leader, and it's still going to exist now in this leader. I think Sakazuki is the premier gatekeeping leader. He's able to keep a lot of like rogue and random stuff down. However, I don't think he'll be able to take some of like the newer aggro stuff. Like I think a Rush Shanks deck and a competent Rayleigh should be able to keep this guy down, but he'll just like beat a lot of the other stuff, right? That like mainly like in the honorable mentions tier, except Buggy. I think Sokka will just like beat a lot of like the GP Luffy, Pluffy, Bonnie, Lim. Being able to play insane events in like the sword event, Hound Blaze. He also got the new Sengoku searcher that searches 2 Navy cards and allows them to pitch a card from hand. The 3-cost blue Sengoku searcher that does almost everything you want in a Navy focused Sokka build, where you're just like filtering your hand, discarding a brick, and then drawing 2 more Navy cards. It's pretty nutty. So Sakazuki, welcome back. I'll put together a list just to you know, have it together and play with, but that's not my deck of the format. I think the deck of the format, the new gatekeeper, the king of hell himself, Mono Green Zoro. This leader was already popping off with Blue Purple Luffy being at the peak, and I think with Blue Purple Luffy may not being as strong as it was, him having a good matchup into a lot of the decks, really. He does well into aggro and mid range, primarily because he can afford to swing into the bodies and still swing face, so he can race the aggro decks. Mid-range decks he can control with his face and a lot of his board units. He's able to stabilize with behind Mihawk, and then he can use Deadman games for tempo. He may not even need to run Deadman's game heavily anymore. I can invest more into just having more bodies that function as removal, right? Zoro should have a positive Sakazuki matchup because Sakazuki's 4 life. Zoro can just rest the Kuzan, rest the Rebekahs, rest the Brooks, and swing into them. And then a similar thing with Lucci. I've seen in the Japan championships, or I'm sorry, the Asia championships, that Zoro win the game against Rob Lucci with no board. So green can win without a board in this instance. In that instance. So that's going to be it for my top 5 speculatory list on the leaders. I might come out with a tier list video soon ranking all the leaders like objectively in different tiers, but I think this will be helpful to get you guys started into what you want to think and what you want to take into the upcoming tournaments. Anyway, that's going to be it for me, guys. You guys have a good one. Thanks.